president, I will be an energetic executive. I will go on offense. I will lean into all the issues that matter.
What does it mean to be an American? It means you believe in the rule of law.
And I don't have anything to announce today, but I can tell you, when I got time to announce come this Wednesday, I'm announcing in Iowa.
Welcome back to America Decides. As you can see, things are heating up in the first-in-the-nation caucus state of Iowa. Several Republican hopefuls made their case to voters there over the weekend in Des Moines, and that's where Senator Joni Ernst held her annual Roast and Ride political rally. Well, to talk more about this, John Kott and Kevin Sheridan join us now. John is a partner at Capitol Counsel and a former senior advisor to Democratic Senators Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Chris Coons of Delaware. And Kevin is founding partner of Protean Public Affairs. He's also a former RNC spokesperson and a former senior advisor to the Romney-Ryan 2012 presidential campaign. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Campaign season is upon us, for better, for worse. We're here. Kevin, I'm curious because you just heard from a lot of Republican candidates over the weekend. We're going to get more jumping into this race this week. Mike Pence, Chris Christie. How do you see, I'm so fascinated by kind of where people see how they fit in. And it seems like Pence and Christie are talking about a Republican Party that, you know, doesn't necessarily exist anymore. But I'm curious kind of how you see them fitting in.
Yeah, it's the zombie Reaganism that they disparagingly, newer type Republicans call it. No, but it remains to be seen. Look, Reagan was a very popular president who's his agenda still lives on in the party. And I see a Mike Pence going to Iowa and making that case. He's going to make the case for the evangelicals, obviously. I think he'll just basically live in Iowa. We'll see if he can catch on with that, sector of the party, and he can gain some momentum there. Chris Christie's going to go to New Hampshire. I think just camp out there, try to get some momentum going there, use earned media. Obviously, he's a favorite of the media. He's going to make some big, bold attacks on Donald Trump, we think, maybe Ron DeSantis and others. But so everybody's got to kind of, going to play their own game. Those are the two newest entrants, and then we might get more. But, we saw Sununu's now getting out. So the field is settling in, and I think we're probably going to get to 11 or 12 or whatever it ends up being. Yeah, and we'll see kind of how the debates start to shape that, too. I'm curious, John, from where you sit on the Democratic side, I mean, how Democrats are looking at this field. Obviously, they know Donald Trump has been leading, but Ron DeSantis also has been, making this play as the alternative. Are Democrats kind of painting everyone the same? Anyone they're particularly concerned about, or are they kind of planning to run against Trump?
Oh, we're loving this. The more people that get in, the better. Like, the infighting with Republicans is great for President Biden. He can stay out of that fray. He can stay above the politics of it. But I think the problem that Republicans have is anybody who wins that primary, and I think Donald Trump is almost, a runaway favorite. Anybody who wins is going to have to be so MAGA to win his voters that it doesn't really matter who it is. They're going to be Trump light. And I think come a general election, they're going to have to run on all of his grievances, all of his shouting conspiracy theories that they're going to have to agree with at some point to get those voters. And I think it's really going to hurt a lot of the more mainstream candidates like a Tim Scott or Mike Pence or Chris Christie. If they want to appeal to those voters, they're going to have to do things that I don't think they're comfortable with.
It's interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking about when a bunch of Democrats were running last time, the premium seemed to be picking a candidate who could defeat Donald Trump. And I'm curious how Republicans are prioritizing, if at all, this idea of electability. I mean, we've started to hear DeSantis talk about the ways in which, they need someone who can win. But Kevin, is this something that Republicans are thinking about? I mean, to Jonathan's point, are they trying to, is there any sense of urgency of preventing someone from getting this nomination, especially Trump?
2/3 of the party would be open to moving beyond Trump. 30% of the party is with Trump and may never leave his side. But we'll have to see if somebody else gets the nomination, whether or not they would ultimately vote with him. But no, it's going to be a really tough thing. I don't think they have to embrace all of his grievances. I haven't heard anybody embracing the 2020, conspiracies in any meaningful way. This group, I think they have to find a way to talk about these issues that, say we're going to embrace, all of the voter turnout models that worked for Democrats. Ballot harvesting and everything else that you said didn't work and hurt us in 2020 and hurt us in 2022 with your candidate recruitment and telling them not to go to the polls. Now, they can make that case, and they already are. And look, electability is a strong argument, but you've got to have a vision, an agenda, positive, optimistic, forward-looking, and you've got to have them both.
Yeah, and you have to get through a primary first before you can start to think about the general. I have to ask you about your former boss, Joe Manchin, because as we know, he likes to talk a lot. He's out there, but also you've been kind of the whisperer for him. I want to play a little bit of sound when he appeared on Face the Nation over the weekend.
And I want you to come back to talk to us when you make a decision about whether you're running for re-election or that other option you said last time you're leaving open, possibly a presidential.
Everything's open. Everything's on the table. Nothing off the table.
Okay, everything's on the table. What's really on the table?
Everything is always on the table for him. And I do think something that people forget about him is he hates the campaign season. He hates the politics of it. He's very happy being a legislator right now, and that's what he's going to spend 2023 on. He is not going to focus on this until December or January. It's exactly what he did in 2018, so I'm sure every reporter's going to ask him about it, but I honestly don't think he's going to make that decision for a very long time, and he'll sit down with his family and he'll decide what he wants to do and what he thinks is best for the state and the country.
There's kind of two decisions he has to make, right, about running for re-election or running for president. I mean, Kevin, if Manchin doesn't run for re-election, I mean, that seems like a Republican win. What's for the Senate side, I should say?
Ideally, he does both. He doesn't run in West Virginia, and he runs third party.
Which kind of brings me to the next point, is that we're talking about the presidential race, but there is a big Senate map to contend with as well. And I'm kind of curious how Republicans are looking at this. I mean, you've had some controversial candidates like Doug Mastriano who have said they're not running. You would imagine that Republicans would be happy about that. What's that race?
Yeah, positive developments this week. Look, there's very little appetite in the party at any level for candidates that lost in 2022 to be renominated to go up again and lose in another favorable environment, because 2022 was a blown opportunity. We all should recognize that and move beyond those candidates that couldn't get it done. Better candidates, better outcomes. We have to have it this time.
Yeah, and so we'll have to just wait to see what Manchin does. What are your guesses?
I have no idea. I think he's not focused on this right now. He just got a huge win for the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I think that's what he's focused on. And he'll, at some point in December, sit down with his wife and kids and grandkids and say, what do you think I should do? By the way, that's exactly what he did in 2018. I worked for him, and I had no idea what he was going to do until he made his decision and told me.
I know. We were all hounding you a lot on those, and we will continue to do so. John and Kevin, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time.